Hey there, nerds! Welcome to Reverse Worldbuilding, the show for people who wish mythology had just a little bit more science in it. My name's Moya McTeer, and I'm an astrophysicist and a folklorist, and I am here to talk to you today about the Gorgon. For most of you who have ever heard the word Gorgon, you've probably heard it in the context of the story of Medusa. Medusa was a character in Greek mythology who was turned into, in the story it's considered this horrible, grotesque monster with snakes for hair and a stare that could turn someone into stone. But Medusa actually wasn't always a Gorgon, and she's not the only one of her kind. Medusa was one of 3 Gorgons. The other 2 are her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who were born Gorgons and are immortal. So Medusa is mostly a Gorgon. She has the snakes for hair, she has the petrifying stare, but she isn't immortal, and so she's actually killed by the hero Perseus. I'm sorry if that's a spoiler alert, but it's been like thousands of years, so if you don't know how the story of Medusa ends by now, then I can't possibly be the only one who has spoiled the ending for you. So what kind of planet could lead to a creature evolving snakes for hair, a stare that turns people into stone, and immortality? Let's find out. First, let's talk about having snakes for hair. Now, it's actually really common in mythology, in the creation of myths, for totally normal, mundane, natural things to be exaggerated or have magic added to them, magical elements added to them, until they become these magical, fantastical, mythical stories that we hear. So I'm going to use that little tidbit of folklore theory to my advantage and say that Medusa and the other Gorgons didn't actually have literal snakes for hair, but that their hair, or the things on their head, looked like snakes, meaning they were long and tube-like and they could move independently of Medusa or the other Gorgon heads, and independently of each other. Following that thread, I'm thinking that Medusa and the other Gorgons don't actually have snakes for hair, but instead they're sensory tentacles. So they can sense things, they can see, they can smell, they can taste. Their tentacles kind of like a snail has. Look at this cute little guy. Some of these sensory tentacles will be eyes. They'll have things at the end of them that can see. You may have heard before that eye placement on a creature determines whether it's predator or prey. I once heard a little rhyme that went, eyes in the front, an animal hunts, eyes on the side, the animal hides. This is just a heuristic, it's a general rule of thumb, it's not always true. If you've ever seen a hippo, they are definitely predators. I mean, this thing could just like chomp your head off without even trying, but its eyes are on the side of its head. So the only thing that eye placement on an animal can actually tell you is whether or not that animal has evolved to prioritize depth perception. Having 2 eyes in the front of your head gives you overlapping fields of view, and that lets you tell how far away something is. Or if they prioritized, like their evolution has prioritized having a wide peripheral field of view. Gorgons have eyes and other sensory tentacles all over their heads. Why do they have so many? To answer that, I look to flies and other insects here on Earth that have thousands, even tens of thousands of optical cells that make up their eye. All of those cells are called ommatidia. Together, these ommatidia create a type of mosaic form of vision, which is actually really great at detecting things that move really swiftly in your field of view, instead of detecting small changes in light intensity, and that's what our eyes are specialized in. All of that is to say that Gorgons probably have all of these sensory tentacles covering their entire head because their main predators move very quickly and can attack from any angle. And you know what that sounds like? Birds. And to me, if a planet has a lot of predatory birds, it's probably a planet that has very low surface gravity. If you think about it, low surface gravity means that it's easier to fly, so there are probably more flying creatures, meaning that there can be more predatory birds. Next, let's move on to the petrifying stare. A Gorgon has the ability to turn someone into stone just by looking at them. But the thing is, it's based on looking. So you have to actually look directly at the Gorgon in order to be turned to stone. I had to do some digging on the internet to think of what could possibly cause this that's not just total magic, and I ended up researching cancer treatments and radiation therapy. It's pretty rare, but it is possible for radiation therapy to actually cause damage to the spinal cord, which could lead to paralysis. And the type of radiation that's used in these therapies is high energy radiation, things like X rays and gamma rays. My thought is that the Gorgon probably evolved on a planet that has a very powerful source, or maybe many sources, of high energy radiation. And so the Gorgon evolved a type of skin that reflects all of these X and gamma rays. So it doesn't absorb any of them, but it reflects them in a very concentrated manner. That way, if you see a Gorgon, then you get all of these high energy rays that get reflected off of its skin, and that will can cause spinal damage and lead to paralysis. This, again, takes advantage of that folklore theory fact that magical things are often based on kernels of very mundane natural things happening. Not that there's anything mundane about getting paralyzed, but it at least isn't magical. One very powerful source of high energy radiation would be a star. So our sun is emitting X-rays and gamma rays, but it's emitting very low levels of X-ray and gamma rays. Most of the light that gets emitted by the sun is in the optical range of the spectrum. That's why our eyes see in this type of light. But there are other types of stars that emit different levels of different types of radiation, and the type of star that emits the most X and gamma rays is a young, very massive star. This actually fits pretty perfectly with the myth. The way that Perseus killed Medusa is that he looked at Medusa's reflection in his shield, and then he beheaded her. That sucks. That's a bad ending to the story. But these types of high energy rays would just pass right through that shield. They wouldn't be reflected, and Perseus then wouldn't be absorbing any of these harmful rays of high energy radiation. There are a few holes in this point, though, because these very massive stars actually don't last long enough to form complex life on any sort of planets that form around them. These massive stars might not even live long enough to form these types of planets. We've never observed a planet around the most massive types of stars, these O and B stars. So there's a little hole in there, but I'm hoping that you'll humor me in this. The third and final characteristic about the Gorgon is their immortality. And again, they're probably not immortal outside of a fantasy fiction narrative, but they just live a very long time, and that can be helped by having a very slow metabolism rate. One thing that contributes to having a slow metabolism is having a one thing that contributes to having a slow metabolism rate is not having a lot of muscle mass. This is actually helped by the planet having low surface gravity, because if there's not much gravity, then you don't have to work very hard to move, so you won't build up a lot of muscle. Another way to have a low metabolism rate is to live in a very stable environment. When you have extreme temperature fluctuations, like moving from very hot environments to very cold environments, that can really tax your metabolic system. One way to get a really stable environment is to take away any tilt from the planet. Our own Earth has a tilt of about 23 degrees from straight up and down. I don't know if you can really see what I'm doing, but this picture will demonstrate it much better than my hands can. And that tilt is really responsible for the seasons that we experience here on Earth. If you take away that tilt, if you give it a tilt or obliquity, if you've been watching all of these reverse world building videos, then you have heard the term obliquity before. If you make the planet have an obliquity of 0 degrees, then there's no seasonal change. So as long as you stay in one location on the planet and you don't move to different latitudes, then you'll be experiencing the same type of weather year-round. And that will help you with your low metabolic rate, which will help you live much longer. And that's my Gorgon planet. I imagine it's a world that has a very low surface gravity. There are a lot of ways that you can do that, either by having less mass or by having a bigger radius. I imagine that the planet probably orbits a very young, massive star. Again, there's a slight hole in that, but we're gonna roll with it. And I imagine that the planet has an obliquity or tilt of 0 degrees, so that you get very small or non-existent seasonal changes. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, then you should subscribe to the channel. That way you don't miss them when they come out. I'd also super appreciate it if you share this channel with your friends, with your family, with your network. Everyone deserves to see how mythical creatures could have realistically evolved on an alien world. But that's it for me, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another reverse world building episode. Thanks for joining.